Welcome back to the next video in the Dominion video tutorial series. In this video, we're going to be talking about some Dominion terms. You're going to hear people say things a lot if you talk to other people about Dominion. So first, it will be helpful to know what these things mean, but also, why are these things instructive? How do these terms help us play better in a game of Dominion? That's the main takeaway here. So the first thing is openings. People talk about a 5-2 opening versus a 4-3 opening. What that means is that since you have exactly 10 cards in your deck to start the game with, that means if I know my first 5 cards through careful subtraction and deck tracking, I can know the next hand. So if I have 5 on my first hand, I'll have 2 on my second hand. 4 on my first hand, I'll have 3 on my second hand. So what this means is that you want to plan your first 2 turns together. I want to know that those 2 cards together are going to be working well for me because I'll be shuffling them in my deck at the same time. The next term you'll hear is a terminal action. And what this means is it doesn't give you any more plus actions at all. It's the last action you could play on a turn. That's where the terminal comes from. So non-terminal actions is just everything that isn't terminal. And this matters for a lot of reasons, but the most apparent reason is that we have this term called terminal space, or how many terminals you can expect to play on an average turn. You don't want to build a deck with so many terminals that you're colliding terminals. If I have 2 terminals in my hand, I can only play one of them, and that's bad because one of the terminals could have been better served by either having a non-terminal or maybe a treasure card, and it would have made my turn better, as opposed to this terminal that I can't play and won't help my current turn. You can talk about terminal space, and the definition of what it really is changes on how many cards you expect to draw on a turn. So if I'm not drawing any cards, then it's easy to say, oh, I'm drawing 5 cards at the start of my turn, and I have 20 cards in my deck, so if I have 4 terminals, I can expect to play 1 every turn. And, that sounds decent until they collide anyway, because that's how Dominion works. So, you can compute your terminal space, but, don't let just numbers educate the decisions you make when you're building your deck and deciding how many terminals you want to put in it. Because maybe playing a terminal every turn is so important that you want to put more than 4 and just accept that you're going to collide. Or maybe colliding them is so bad and the benefit you get from the terminal is so little that you want to put less than 4 in that deck. Because if I have a turn without a terminal, that's okay as long as I don't collide. Finally, for this slide at least, there's cantrip. Basically, in Dominion, it means any card that gives you at least +1 card and +1 action. This matters because the action, assuming it's an action card, because only action cards can give you this stuff, the action replaces the action that it originally took to play the card, and then the +1 card replaces the original card that you had to draw to get this in your hand. So if a card gives you at least that much, it's called a cantrip. And normally, barring some edge cases, having cantrips in your deck will not hurt your deck. Now, granted, maybe you could have bought something better, but a cantrip is a useful metric because now you don't have to worry about drawing that card, or maybe I could have drawn something else. So that's what cantrip is useful for. Next couple of terms are a little more meaty and a little more relevant to actual games. So the first one is a village, or sometimes people will call this a splitter. The definition of this is anything that allows you to play multiple terminal actions in one turn. So a lot of these will give you +2 actions, and a lot of them have village in the name, like, village, or farming village, or fishing village, or something. That's not always the case. There are a lot of villages in the game. There's a lot of them. And a lot of them don't say village. There's even one that says village that isn't a village, like Ruin Village. But they will give you this effect in ways that are a lot of times better than just giving you 2 actions, or sometimes worse. But you have to look hard and think through what happens. So in the description of this video, I'll link to an article that I have that will give you an exhaustive list of all the villages if that's what you want. But make sure that you look through and think through what cards are actually doing for you, and see if there's actually a village on the board. Because anything that is a village will give you this effect. And if it gives you that effect, then it's just as good as a village that gives you +2 actions. Finally, for this slide, there is draw. And the definition of draw here is any combination of cards that increases your hand size without decreasing the number of actions you have remaining. Now, there are some slightly different definitions of draw. They're just as valid. That's fine. We're going to work with this one because it's my video and I chose this one, I guess. What does that mean? It means that Laboratory, that's a draw card. You play it, you get your action back, and you have 2 cards, and it only took you 1 card to initially draw the lab. So you start with 5, you play the lab, you end with 6 cards in your hand, and you don't have any less actions than what you started with because the lab gave you an action. The card Smithy, that is not draw, because even though it increases your hand size, it decreased the number of actions, so that doesn't work. But if you take Village plus Smithy, that combination of cards, if I play a Village, then I play a Smithy, that was draw. Because at the end of that, I still have 1 action remaining, but I increased my hand size. I now have 7 cards in my hand instead of just the 5. So, draw is a combination of cards that will achieve this effect for you. And when you're evaluating what draw cards are, again, I have an article that I'll link in the description. Some of them just work for you, some of them require some support, and the most common type of support that a draw card would require is a Village, right? Smithy is one of those cards that requires Village support in order to give you that draw effect. So you can take a look at all of the draw cards, but when you're thinking about, can I increase my hand size on this board, well, you can look at the draw and make sure it has all the support that it needs. Think through, am I going to increase my hand size, etc. The next term that I want to talk about doesn't have a pretty standard name. You're going to hear a lot of people use a lot of different words to describe what they're talking about here. You might hear cycling, velocity, deck speed, anything like that. I don't want to use a standard term because the definitions are muddy or specific enough. The more important thing here is why you're doing this, and the concept we're focusing on is the result of playing your best cards more often. So I have cards in my deck, and I've decided some of them are better than others, and I want to play the better ones more often or when it's convenient for me to play them. The 2 most effective ways of doing this are trashing and draw. If I have less bad cards, because I've trashed them, then of course, then I'll be playing the good ones more often. And then draw, if I can draw all of the cards, then even if I can only play some of them, well, I can just choose to play the best ones, and then I'm playing the best ones, more often. So these are the strongest forms of that. However, there are other ways of accomplishing this goal that aren't trashing and draw, and some cards are really only good for this purpose. And it's important to know why you're doing it. So one of them is top decking cards. You can put newly gained cards on top of your deck or maybe in your hand instead of having them in your discard. That means you get to see them sooner, and so supposedly you play them more often. Obviously, if the newly gained card is not one of your best cards, then this isn't good for you. So as long as we're focusing on the why, what we're doing, we want to play best cards more often. It's clear when this is good and when it's not. Another method is increasing the quality of cards in your hand or on top of your deck. So something like a cellar or a warehouse will increase the quality of cards in your hand, even though it may not increase the quantity of cards in your hand. And then there are similar effects for the top of your deck, such as Cartographer. Another way of doing this is moving cards from your deck to your discard. You'll hear this called cycling a lot of the time, or various other words. It applies to different games as well. The thing is, you'll shuffle your deck more often, and the assumption is that, well, I'm putting good cards in my deck, and so if I shuffle them in more, that means I see them faster. The time between when I gain those better cards and when I'm playing them is going to be shortened because I'm doing this. Again, though, this falls apart if you're not adding good cards to your deck, or if you're just adding cards that are the same. So remember, you want to be playing your best cards more often, and so if you're gaining the best cards, then of course doing this helps you, but if not, then it doesn't. And then finally, just buying a lot of copies of that card can allow you to play your best cards more often. If I have more of it, I'm more likely to see it on any given hand, or maybe multiple copies on a certain hand. Each one of these has its applications, and these applications can also change pretty significantly if you draw your entire deck. There is a lot more detail in a podcast episode that I will link in the description of this video if you want to hear about that. Be advised that some of the terminology is, a little bit different. Again, the terminology is in flux, but the reason we're doing this is you want to play your best cards more often. And this is going to help you in cases where you look at a card like Sage or Border Guard. These cards aren't any of the other effects that we've talked about, the whole reason that these are good cards is because they allow you to play your best cards more often if you're putting them in the right situation to do that for you. Alright, so that's the end of this video about Dominion terms. The next video is going to be about some more Dominion terms, but they're going to take these terms and they're going to build upon them to get some concepts that are more directly related to games of Dominion. So I hope you enjoy that video. Thanks for watching.